Thank you everybody for coming. It's a real pleasure to be here. So today I'm going to be talking about how to transform your client-agency relationships into true strategic partnerships. And I'm going to be speaking primarily to the client-side marketer audience. And the reason why I'm talking about this particular topic is because I fundamentally believe that strong client-agency relationships are the foundation for amazing work and amazing business results. And I owe a lot to the agencies I've had the great fortune of working with over the years. I've learned a lot from agencies. I've been proven wrong a lot by agencies. And I never cease to be amazed by the amount of creativity that comes out of some really fantastic agency teams. So how many of you are involved in some sort of an agency-client relationship right now, or working with agency-client relationships? So it's a pretty big part of our jobs as marketers, both on the client side and also the agency side. And what I'd encourage you to do for today is just think a little bit about the things that you've been taught about how to manage agencies. If you're on the client side, what are the things that your manager has told you about the best way to manage an agency relationship? And I'll bet you there are certain things that you agree with and certain things you don't agree with. And for the purposes of today, I would dare you to be unconventional. I would dare you to be unconventional in the way that you approach your relationships, because I believe that being brave and being unconventional and being non-traditional is the best way to deliver great results. So today I'm going to be talking about three things: the brief, the pitch, and the work. So this presumes that you, as a client, have a particular creative project that you're wanting to run. You're briefing that out to multiple agencies, and you're running a competitive pitch process. You're selecting the best agency, and then you're proceeding with hiring that agency to create the final deliverable for that work. Okay, so that's the scope of what I'm going to be covering today. And I'll talk to you about our tendency as clients, what we tend to do, why I think that doesn't work so well, and an alternative way to proceed with managing your client-agency relationships. Before I get started, just a little bit about me. So I've been in brand management for about 8 years. I started my brand management career in the United States at a company called Avalier Health, where I was responsible for a corporate branding initiative. Then got my MBA from the University of Michigan in entrepreneurship and marketing. I entered the household goods FMCG industry at a company called Clorox. I started my brand management career in FMCG on the bin liner business of Glad, which was not necessarily how I planned it, but it was a wonderful brand to work on. It got better. I went from there and worked on drain opener afterwards at Liquid Plumber. Came here to the UK and then moved to a brand called Goo, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I was a senior brand manager for Goo and worked on a really exciting campaign called Give In to Goo, which later got an IPA award for effectiveness. And I'm currently the senior brand manager for global strategy and communications for Häagen-Dazs, based here in London, which is owned by General Mills. I also run my own career consulting practice called Onward Coaching, where I'm working with clients who are business professionals and marketers who are dealing with some change in their lives, and I help them navigate times of both career change and also life change. And then just very quickly about General Mills. So General Mills is a $15 billion company. Our brands are sold in over 100 countries around the world, and we're one of the world's leading food companies. Most of our brands, which you see here, are number 1 or number 2 in their categories. And here in the UK, you might be familiar with some of our brands, including Green Giant, Old El Paso, Just Roll, Betty Crocker, and of course, Häagen-Dazs. So that's a little bit about me. I just want to make a very quick disclaimer before I go any further here. So my views today do not represent those of General Mills or their affiliates. It doesn't represent my time specifically on Häagen-Dazs or my time specifically at General Mills or any particular brand assignment. My talk today is informed by 2 sources. Number 1 is my own experiences working across multiple brands in multiple countries, multiple types of businesses, and multiple types of teams. And I've observed along the way certain types of behavior on client teams that I feel results in effective behavior on clients, and certain behaviors on the client side that are ineffective in terms of driving great creative work out of the agency. So that's one source. The other source is that I've never worked in an agency myself, but I have worked with quite a few agencies. And what I've done before this talk is I've reached out to a few of them, not all of them here, but a few of them, to get their thoughts on what are some of the things that your clients do that you really appreciate? What are some of the things that your worst clients do that really get on your nerves? What are some of your pet peeves? And what I've tried to do is collect all that information today, gather some themes, and share those with you. So, the brief. Clients love briefing. It's an opportunity for us to relaunch our brands, to really make a difference, to make our mark when we have these brand assignments. The only issue with the brief is sometimes we have a certain tendency to not act like marketers. And what I mean by that is we're brand managers, or we're marketing managers, we're marketing directors. Those are our job titles. We're marketers. The problem is we have this tendency of suddenly changing jobs. We change our job titles to create this encyclopedia of a brief, which we then lob over to the agencies and expect them to kind of make sense of it. And what do I mean when I say we change jobs? Well, the first thing we do is we become litigators with our brand truths. We become lawyers, and we take those and we put those into the brief. We become rocket scientists with our launch plans, and we take those and we put those into the brief. It doesn't stop there. We move on, we become ethnographers and psychologists and psychiatrists and sociologists, and we put together this great brand target description for our consumer target. And we become architects. We suddenly talk about product pillars and platforms and brand triangles and pyramids and blueprints and benefit ladders. And we take all that information and we cram it into a brief. And it doesn't stop there. We become historians with the brand history. We take that, we put that in. We become botanists with our growth ideas. And finally, we become cartographers with our roadmaps. And we take all that, put it together, and hand it over to the agency. How many of you have experienced that? Does this ever happen? So what's wrong with this approach? What is wrong with this? Well, complete and utter confusion, right? If you're on the agency side, you receive a brief like this, you're not going to be able to make sense of that. And one of the first creative directors I worked with at Clorox, it was an internal creative director, and he told me garbage in, garbage out. You put garbage into a brief, you will definitely get garbage out of the brief. You run a chaotic briefing process, you will get chaotic output. And one of the things I really like doing when I'm not doing marketing is I love cooking. And when I was in San Francisco, I used to go to cooking classes, and I remember going to a cooking class, and one of the students in the audience asked, does it matter what kind of cooking wine you use when you're cooking? Because you're just going to boil it off anyway, right? And the head chef was up there, and he thought about it, and he said, well, the type of wine you use isn't going to make or break your dish, but it's not going to taste any better as you cook it, that's for sure. So use really good wine. Okay, so create really good briefs. I'm going to give you 3 ideas today on how to create a great brief, because there is an alternative way. Number 1, be brief. Be brief. Okay, now this is an idea that comes from a company called Slide Comet, and there's a great presentation that they have called Great Presentations Are Like Ads. And I would highly recommend you check that out if you're ever giving a presentation. And the question is, what do briefs do? What do briefs do? They cover what's important. They cover what's important. So in your brief, cover only the things that you absolutely must cover and nothing else. Because if you have precision in your brief, if you're able to get to clarity quickly in your brief, I guarantee you that the agency will be able to take that and create a clear output from that input. Okay, so be brief. The second is to be creative with your brief. So we as clients, we tend to take Word documents or existing PowerPoint presentations from last year's brand plans, and we kind of just shovel them over to the agency. And what I encourage you to do is to be creative with your briefs. By that I mean don't use words. Have the agency come and spend some time with one of your consumers. Have the agency come and spend some time with your head chef, your head technologist. Have them come to one of your events. Have them spend time with your team. And one of the best examples of being able to test if a client knows what they want out of a brief is, can they summarize it in 15 words or less? Some of the best briefs I've seen have been done in less than 5 words. If you can give the elevator pitch as a client in 15 words or less, that's a sign to me that you know exactly what you want. Okay? And one of the examples that you see here is from the Kellogg's Big Breakfast ad, which I don't know if any of you have seen this, but it launched 2 years ago. And essentially a bunch of people come out when they wake up in the morning and they go and they have breakfast with all their neighbors on the street with a box of Kellogg's cornflakes. And the story goes, and this was shared with me by one of my former agency partners, the story goes that the marketing director for the briefing walked in with only 2 objects in his hands. He walked in with a box of Kellogg's cornflakes, which he put on the table, and he walked in with an alarm clock, which he put on the table, slammed it down, the alarm went off, and he said, "That's your brief." I want you to connect that sound to this box. And that was it. Brilliant. Okay, so be brief, be creative with your brief. The next thing is to be specific and be clear about your expectations within the brief. So one of the agencies I reach out to said that clients have a tendency sometimes to be a bit vague in what we want. Sometimes we can't be very specific. And what I would encourage you to do if you're writing a brief is to be as specific and precise as possible about what your expectations are. Now, Seth Godin, who is a marketing thought leader, who wrote The Purple Cow, he also has another publication, probably a little lesser known, called the Ship It Journal. And in that, which is essentially a guide to managing projects effectively and efficiently. And in that, he talks about the importance of when you're kicking off a project to make it clear to whoever you're briefing, what does good enough look like? What does great look like? And what does perfect look like? What's hard about this? Who are the key stakeholders who need to be involved? Do I have decision-making power or not? If I don't have decision-making power, who does have decision-making power? What is the exact budget? What is the exact drop-dead delivery date? So be as specific as possible with your expectations. Okay, so those are my 3 recommendations for you to make a brief more effective. So be brief, be creative with the brief, and be specific about your expectations within the brief. Okay, so you brief the agency, and now the pitch process begins, which is where the fun begins, right? The pitch process begins, which I'm defining as the time between when you've briefed the agency in and the time when they give you your final response back. And the tendency, as clients, is once we have sent the briefs off, is to just kind of sit back and just kind of see what we catch, to take a completely passive approach. We're hands off. If the agency ever asks us any questions, we don't respond. It takes us a long time to get back to them. We're moving on to our other projects. We're completely unavailable. And so what happens is the agency then goes off with the information you've given them from a brief that maybe wasn't clear in the beginning, and they disappear and they invest a lot of time and resource and energy and people hours coming up with a really creative response, and they invite you over to the agency, and the foam boards come out and the mood boards and the mood videos. Sometimes you get taken to a really nice room with the curtains, and there's the big reveal, and then all of a sudden they expect a response from the client. The client, as clients, we just kind of sit there and we're completely poker-faced. We walk out of the room, we don't say a word, and then we leave the agency hanging. And I've been guilty of this. I've done this before. I haven't felt good about it, which is why I'm bringing it up now. But we leave the agency hanging, during which time they can't plan their resources. They have no idea about the revenue streams. They don't have any idea if this project's going to go through. You just leave them hanging. And what is the problem with this? I mean, why is this an issue? And the reason why this is an issue is because everyone loses. Everyone loses. As a client, I lose because if I hire the agency, they're already demotivated. They think I can't run a project efficiently. If I don't hire them, I probably burned a bridge with an agency. On the agency side, you don't know what's in your future, whether you get the client account or not. So you're sitting around not being able to be shifted off to other resources, but unsure if this is going to go through. How many of you have ever rented a car or hired a car? Anybody ever hired a car, rented a car? Do you drive that car any differently than the car that you own at home? Okay, how many of you have ever rented a sports car? Anybody rented a sports car? Do you drive that a little differently when you've got that for the weekend? Now, I have, okay? I mean, I admit it. I haven't rented a sports car that often, but I've done it. I'm one of those people who I try to go from 0 to 60 as fast as I can, slamming on the brakes, testing out the stereo, checking out the bass, taking the top down, putting it back up, taking it down, putting it back up, cleaning the windshields every 50 seconds. Right, you behave differently. And this is an issue because this illustrates the concept of moral hazard, which is really evident in client agency pitch processes because at this stage there is no exchange of money yet. And because of that, it creates moral hazard. By moral hazard, I mean an individual ends up taking on more risks or behaves more carelessly because the costs don't end up landing on them. The clients don't have any skin in the game yet. So we tend to be a little bit reckless. with this process, which is not right. It's not right. But there is an alternative way. There's an alternative way to handle the pitch process. And number one, I would say that you've got to be able to be there to provide feedback. You've got to be able to provide the information that the agency needs so they can come up with the best response possible. The second thing is, treat your agency as if they're already hired. And by that I mean, I'm not talking about exchanging money or anything. I'm just talking about treating the relationship with respect, being there to provide feedback, having more than just one tissue session, meeting with them regularly. It definitely takes more time, it definitely takes more effort. It's going to take more energy as a client, but it will lead to a more effective relationship with your agency. So treat them as if they're already hired. And this is the only way you're going to get a sense of how this agency responds to feedback, their creative philosophy. And as an agency, this is also your time. This is a two-way street. So this is your opportunity to see if you want to work with me as a client, because that's also a choice. Okay? And then the final thing is to make sure that you respect their time. If you're on the client side and you're running a pitch process, start and end the pitch process at the same time with all the agencies. Now, logistically, that's going to be complicated. It's going to take a lot of planning on your part. But these things take effort. Running an efficient pitch process takes energy. It takes your time as a client. And if you want to get a good outcome, you will invest the time to run it efficiently and effectively. Okay, so be there to provide feedback, treat the agency as if they're already hired, and then finally just respect their time. Okay, so final thing is we're going to talk about the work. So the work, so you've hired the agency. Everybody's really happy. You go out for drinks together. The relationship's off to a great start. This is kind of the honeymoon phase, right? Everybody's really thrilled that the work has gone through. But then what happens? Clients, again, we will tend to behave a certain way. Once we've locked up the agency, we then suddenly leave them to solve our impossible issues. I mean, you thought the pitch process was hard. We got more issues back there, and we're happy to kind of funnel your way. So we leave you to solve an impossible puzzle. In the meantime, every meeting, for some reason, feels like you're on X Factor. It's like it's a constant audition again and again and again, but I thought we hired the agency, so shouldn't we be treating them as partners at this point? I mean, making every meeting a test for your agency, making every meeting another audition where the agency has to prove themselves is exhausting, it's demotivating, you won't get the best results out of people. It doesn't signal the right things in terms of the trust in the relationship. So then what happens is we decide we're going to change the brief. Okay, this never happens, right? Clients never change briefs, right? How many of you have ever had a client change a brief on you? How many of you, as clients, have changed a brief? Okay, it stinks. This is whack-a-mole. I don't know if this is an American game or you find this in the UK, but essentially, you take care of one thing and suddenly another issue pops up. And we thought this was just going to be a TV campaign. Suddenly we decided that we actually want to have a below-the-line campaign. Actually, we want to turn it into an in-store activation. Or we raise the bar. You know how we said it was going to be an above-the-line TV campaign? Actually, if we could have an entire through-the-line campaign. We have TV and print and digital and in-store, event kickoff, outside of store, outdoor campaign, social media activation. Oh, and by the way, with the same budget, we're not going to change the budget. And so imagine if you were going back to the food analogy, imagine you were at a fancy restaurant. We've all been to restaurants before. And you place an order for like a sirloin steak. And the chefs are back there cooking and cooking and cooking. They're working really hard. And right when they bring out the steak, you say, oh, yeah, I'm really sorry, but my friend has just joined me, and she's actually a vegetarian, and we're going to share the dish. So could you just kind of send that back and just kind of try to make it so that we can both eat it? Oh, and just one more thing. I got 2 more friends who are joining also. If you could also make it halal, and if you could also make it kosher. And I forgot to mention, I'm also allergic to spices. All spices, actually. So if you could just go back and kind of accommodate all those requirements, but still make sure it's tasty. Make sure it's tasty, though. Okay, so chef goes back. He tries to cook up a different dish or alter the dish that he gave you. And then what happens? The food arrives. The food arrives, and suddenly we're shocked that the output isn't what we expected. We're absolutely appalled that the agency didn't get it right. Okay, so why is this situation here an issue? Okay, the reason why this is an issue is because you will not make any progress on any of your projects. You will be working really hard, you'll be having a lot of meetings, but you won't get anything done. The whole point of starting a new relationship is to reinvigorate the brand. Oftentimes it's a brand relaunch. You won't get that done because you'll have a demotivated team, the work will be diluted, it won't be clear what you're trying to accomplish. It defeats the whole purpose of starting this work. But there is another way. There is another way. I've got 3 recommendations on another way of working. Number 1 is to be available as needed. Be available as needed. If the agency calls, you respond. The client as a client, you got to be as responsive as the agency. This whole concept of the agencies being nimble and they're the ones who've got to be adaptive, I think that is true. I'm not saying the agencies are off the hook here. But as a client, I also need to be prepared to invest enough time in this activity to make it worth the agency's time. This takes effort. This whole idea of agencies kind of working off on their own and I can move off on my other projects as a client, it doesn't make sense. It's not like a background app. Okay, you got to nurture the relationship. I'm working with 2 agencies right now on a campaign. I'm on the phone with them at least once or twice a day sometimes. And it's not to necessarily micromanage, but it's to just be there when they need you. And the agency will let you know if they need more or less slack. The second recommendation I have is to shift away from this idea of the agency works for us to the agency works with us. There's a client team and there's an agency team, and I admit I think the client lead and the agency account manager are probably in the toughest spots. You're the ones who are having to be the lead negotiators. You're the ones who are having to manage both sides of the table. But I encourage you to reconsider working tightly as a team, as true partners, having each other's back. I mean, it's in my interest to make sure that my agency account manager is shining. And my presumption is that they're also trying to do the same thing for me. Okay, so shift the mentality from they work for us to they work with us. And then finally, do not change your order. If you're a client and you change your mind, if another stakeholder comes in along the way, it's not okay to get alignment to the brief after you've briefed it in. Because you're not going to get a great output. It's not okay to change the brief. It's not okay to raise the bar. And if you do change the brief and you have them start over, you've got to be prepared to pay for it. Just like you would if you were in a restaurant. You probably have to pay 50 quid for the steak. You're spending sometimes 50 million on a campaign. So the same rules apply. And then I'll just kind of finish up with my kind of final pet peeve. And this is, I've been talking a lot about client side. I'll also make a point about agencies, but I think my biggest pet peeve when it comes to clients is this whole concept of something falling down in the execution. Okay, I've heard this phrase of, well, we had a great strategy, but the execution was off. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen sometimes. Sometimes, yeah, the execution doesn't work out. Maybe it is the execution. But if you are involved along the way, if you're involved with your agency, if you're there working collaboratively, if there's an environment of trust, I mean, you should know exactly what you're going to be getting in the final deliverable. As far as I know, clients are there at the pre-pro. They're there signing off the brief. They're there signing off the production. They're signing off the talent, the props, the music. They're signing off everything. So this shouldn't be a surprise to you what you get back in the execution if you've been involved throughout. And then the only thing I'll just say about agencies is I think that if I'm taking the time as a client to be this involved with the process, if I'm there being responsive, I would just expect the same in return. So my only time I've ever had issues with agencies is if they are unresponsive to me being involved in the project as they want me to be. So if I give feedback, they don't take it on board, or they stick rigidly to one particular solution. So again, the same rules apply. I think that this mutual respect, being mutually adaptable, hearing each other's feedback is just really important on both sides of the equation. Okay? And my challenge to you is to not think of there being a client team and an agency team, but thinking of it as a holistic client-agency team. Jointly owning, jointly presenting, sitting on the same side of the table when you're at meetings, try that. It makes a big difference in meeting dynamics. And jointly being accountable for the end result. And you do that, I mean, you run a process that is full of clarity, that is collaborative and full of respect, and I guarantee you, you will transform your traditional, conventional, transactional agency-client relationships into true strategic partnerships that will deliver great results, great creative, and have a tremendous impact on your business. And with that, I'll just finish up with 2 words which I think are not said enough, not only at the end of projects, but throughout, and that's thank you. Thank you.